I was a dude, then I was a boyfriend, then I was a husband, then I was a father, and my dude self sometimes wants to come out more. And the resolution of my dude self with my father self is sometimes a real struggle.
Hi, I'm Kai Sorensen, Director of Podcasts here at Balancing Life's Issues, and welcome to a very special two-part drop of This Is Your Job Now. If you've listened to this show before, you know we talk a lot about real leadership, the kind that shows up for the whole person, the total individual. And in this conversation with Dr. Jason Frishman, we're taking that idea into fresh territory: fatherhood, mental health, and why well-being isn't just about fixing what's broken. It's about intentionally building what helps us thrive. Jason's a clinical psychologist, guide, and father who's spent decades helping men connect with themselves and each other in ways that challenge old stories about what it means to quote-unquote man up. In part one, we're going to talk about why fathers need community, what it looks like to challenge outdated ideas of masculinity, and how leaders, yes, even those who are not dads, can create supportive spaces that help people show up as their full selves at work and at home. In part two, Jason will guide you, especially the fathers tuning in, through a practical exercise called the Values Compass. If you can find 15 quiet minutes, you'll be able to pause, reflect, and map out what really matters most for you, your family, and the way you lead. So settle in. This is your moment to breathe, to listen, and maybe to see fatherhood and well-being in a whole new way, because showing up for the total individual is your job now. Let's get started. Welcome to This Is Your Job Now, because leadership means showing up, especially when it's uncomfortable. Today's guest is Jason Frishman, therapist, facilitator, and founder of the JourneyMen Foundation. He's built a space where men, especially dads, can be real about what they're going through, not just as parents, but as people, which is why Greg and I are here leading this discussion as opposed to Wendy, because we are brand new dads. We're not brand new. What am I talking about? Greg, tell us a little bit about your current family life, and then I'll go into mine before we bring in Jason.
Yeah, I've got a lovely wife and two children, two daughters. They in a month, they will be 4 and 2.
My wife and I have son who's going to be 2 at the end of June, and that will bring us to our guest. Jason, welcome to This Is Your Job Now.
Excellent. Thank you all so much, and I'm really glad to be here. I'll follow suit and say I have 2 sons, wife and 2 sons. We live here in rural Vermont, and they are 17 and 14.
Well, here we are. Greg and I are both deeply curious about the work you do with fathers. So I guess tell us a little bit about what you do, how you got there, and I guess maybe at the end of that question, why should leaders care about fatherhood?
That's the question, right? But, a little background is I've been a psychologist for 30 years, practicing primarily as a psychotherapist. And so for the vast majority of that time, I've worked with boys, families, and men. And as my career has moved on, I've worked more and more with men and fathers and become really passionate about the sort of mental health, social health, connective health of men and men's work. And so that became really a passion in my psychotherapy practice. My caseload sort of evolved. I saw more and more men who were doodads, and really this idea of fathering as a verb became really important to me. Like, as men, what are we fathering? What are we bringing to the table? And so, 2019, 2018, before the pandemic, I started JourneyMen as a coaching program, mostly to be able to bring the work out of the psychotherapy space for lots of really different and powerful reasons. But primarily as a coach, we have a little bit more freedom to work outside the sort of realm of the office. Metaphorically and literally, we can be out of the therapy office, which brings me to your question around leadership and why should leaders care about fathers is because we are out of the office. We're at home, we're at work, when you hold the role and the identity of a father, you don't put it down for work, right? You don't leave it when you go out with your friends. It's always there. And so as leaders, if we help men integrate that role and that identity into the other areas and arenas of their lives, everything gets better. When we heal men, we heal our communities and our cultures and whatnot.
Yeah, so I guess it got me thinking of is there a recent example, maybe we can all provide one, of where fatherhood moment and now I have to go to work and maybe I wasn't able to leave fatherhood at the table, or maybe I shouldn't have left fatherhood, at the door. So like, Greg, is anything coming to mind recently of father bleeding into work?
Sure. I mean, there's many times where I forget to lock the door to this space that I'm currently in right now that I work from. And I work from home, and my eldest daughter finds her way in, and she has joined many a meeting where I've been like, oh, please excuse me. There's a toddler in the background. She's just hanging. Give me just 15 seconds. Just give me some grace here. And I'm very thankful that for the most part, we're in an environment, Kai, and you can speak to this too, that is very much part of our culture of finding that flexibility and understanding that we take every bit of life that is thrown our way and integrate it into our work environment. So for that, we're very fortunate. But yeah, I think there is also sometimes, this job isn't exactly 9 to 5, right? We get the calls at 6:30, sometimes 7, right? So there have been times where I've been going down the street, or just recently was with my daughter. She was going for a bike ride down the street that I was walking alongside her, and I got a call. It was a little bit after hours, and I picked it up and I said, hi, I'm so glad you called. I know this is a time sensitive thing, but just so you know, there's a toddler in tow, so you might hear some of that. And if our conversation gets interrupted briefly, I do apologize. But those are just some examples of integrating fatherhood into work and vice versa. And just that flexibility is so important.
Yeah, and I think, Jason, the question I want to add too, because those same anecdotes and more for myself, I think more recently might have been more about like just sleep, like lack thereof, maybe kind of bringing that kind of fatigue to the workplace. So I think, Jason, over to you, the question I have is for leaders who are not flexible or who are not empathetic to that version of a person who's in the office today, who's maybe sleep deprived or at home working because the kids are sick, and what does that do to like maybe the psychological safety of someone in the workplace who doesn't feel like they have that support from leadership?
Okay, that's such a huge question, because as soon as you said that, I sort of went in a lot of different directions because, the idea of what it does to psychological safety is so important to like being an efficient and effective worker and being present with all of your colleagues and all those things. And also it sends a bigger message to that individual man for when he's at home as well, right? We're basically, when leaders aren't empathetic to the situation of fatherhood, we are basically suggesting or strong arming, you must be separate. You must create different identities. You must be at work, then you must be at home, and definitely don't bring work home, but don't bring home to work, right? Like that becomes a message that is painful for so many men. And so psychological safety, it's sort of the ease of that moves from work to home and vice versa. And so men carry that. That becomes an extra weight on top of many of the other things that fathers specifically are holding. And so, at work, guys will be distracted. They're likely not going to be, as free to be connected. Like, Greg, when you gave your example, you say, oh, there's a toddler in tow. So if I get distracted, I'll tell you. Right. So you're suggesting something in the very beginning that then gives explicit permission in both directions to be like, hey, hold on a minute. Let me do this. I loved, as a result of the pandemic and everything, lots of things being on Zoom, I sort of have loved watching where in the middle of some meeting, not therapy sessions, that's different, but in the middle of some meeting, a kid comes in the back door or someone's screaming or, those kind of things. And there's been a bit of a shift, and I think it's a good thing, but without it, it impacts, it's a downward spiral. It impacts workers, the community and the culture at work, and it impacts the community culture at home for a father.
It seems like a lot of the work you do is challenging this traditional norm of fathers in the workplace, right? I'm father at home and I am man working in the workplace. So I guess with the work you do, how do you challenge that norm, and like what kind of challenges do you see with people coming to kind of where you're at with all of this?
Well, I think the first piece of challenging any norm is identifying it and seeing it. right? The idea of typical norms that we all live in. It's like, a fish like swimming in water, right? It doesn't recognize it's in water. We don't often think about the air we breathe. And the
Hmm.
stories and the norms and the behavior, the patterns of sort of modern day fatherhood are things that we don't actually think about that often. We may think about, oh, this is stressful. Oh, I'm irritated. But we don't take the time to identify, recognize, and kind of explore these dominant kind of norms and ways of being. And so the very first thing is I asked a lot of questions about what it's like and how does that impact? And let's learn, let's name that, right? When you say this norm,
Hmm.
right? Maybe it is the non-empathetic norm. We name it because
Yeah.
now once we name it, we have something to reference and we have a language, right? The three of us now, if I say the non-empathetic norm, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And so
Right. Right.
I can, and once I do that, I can recognize it more and I can be aware of it. I can notice how that feels. I can notice how it feels when I'm doing well or when I'm not doing well, when when I'm fed and not or hungry, they have different impact on our interactions with others have different impacts on us based on what's been going on. If I leave for
Right.
work after having a big argument with my partner, I'm going to show up at work slightly differently. If I come
Yeah.
home after being yelled at by my boss, I'm going to show up at home very differently. And
Yeah.
so the idea of challenging these norms is to help guys first understand them and notice them. And then
Hmm.
second, be at a place in their own sort of self-awareness that they can understand what choices they can make that might be different and that might bring them to a more connected place, which is really ultimately in many ways the goal.
Yeah, yeah. No, no, that all makes sense. And Greg, I'm super curious what you think about this because I know with my generation, millennial, 37, at the time of this recording, it does feel like, at least in my community of friends who have fathers, and I think culturally, there is more of a shift to, I think, fathers taking more of a hands-on role in parenting, with nurturing, I think especially. So I don't know. That's definitely been my experience. Like my wife was not interested in a family if it wasn't as much of a 50-50 split as possible. And we both admit right now with a toddler, it's closer to 60-40 in terms of needing mom, which we're working on. But yeah, Greg, I'm curious, has that been your experience just kind of like within your, I guess, norm, like what the air I'm currently breathing and maybe trying to identify it?
Totally. And similarly, Kai, there is more of a gravitation from them to mom as well right now, where it's like mom has to she has to prepare the meal right now for
Yeah.
whatever reason. Like
But mom needs a break.
yeah, like for whatever reason I can't do it according to my eldest. She's like,
Yes.
"No, daddy, you can't do that. It has to be for mom."
Uh-huh.
But to your point, yeah, the expectation is definitely that I'm as equally involved and available as humanly possible. And, I don't think we ever, my wife and I ever sat down and had that conversation, but we were definitely on the same page. And we've mentioned it from time to time of, finding the time to be equally there. And just interesting to see. I don't have the studies. Maybe we could do this after to support this, but there is something about, how many diapers are changed by fathers as generations progress, right? And, going back to, the fathers of baby boomers changed rarely any diapers. And then, so forth, been more involvement there. So that's just an interesting kind of perspective of how fathers are involved in very small ways that, Kai, to you and I feel like no brainer, a diaper change, no problem, right? Of course.
Yeah. But I do remember when Miles was first born, I think we live in a pretty neutral community. There's a good mix of, conservative values, liberal values, and I think it's a very nice community. But when Miles was first born, I do remember getting strange looks because I would have Miles strapped to me in the harness, at the grocery store or at the community music thing that was going on, definitely from an older community, interesting. That seems more of a maternal role that this person, I wonder what he's all about, right? It's you could just see the gears turning, which is super interesting. So I think this is leading me to asking you, Jason, going back to leaders, creating these supportive environments. Like, as the times change, it seems like as leaders, we need to be aware of this too, that fathers are playing more of a role nowadays.
Absolutely. Even more than leaders needing to be more aware, leaders need to be leading, right? Like this is a change. And what's interesting, and I don't remember the exact percentage, so I'm not going to state it incorrectly just in case, but there's some huge percentage statistically that fathers are spending more time nurturing and caring and being with their kids. But the interesting thing about that statistic is that there aren't that a proportionate level of resources for fathers who are now staying home doing things that they were not trained by their own fathers to do, to no fault of the fathers, but like let's just say we're home and we're engaged 300% more than in the 50s. That means we have 300% more opportunity grew up, and it's an interesting shift.
Yeah.
I don't mean it that way because it's a lovely thing and I'm
Yeah.
all for it. But we're now at home. We are all well-meaning. We're carrying our kids. We're changing diapers. We're doing all those things. And yet we're still holding these old stories and old norms about what fatherhood is, about what masculinity is. And we have this need to really support and educate and really guide, fathers who are willing to sort of take that journey. So to your question about leaders, the idea that leaders become more aware that fathers are, even if we're at work, we're thinking about our kids more than just the obligatory picture on your desk. And so,
Yeah.
Are there resource groups? Are there supports? Is there time and structures put in that fathers can, in service of being a better employee, a more effective man, a more related human? This is a place that at work that can happen really effectively, and it's win-win for everyone.
Yeah, and I think that kind of gets me back to kind of the work you do, because I know Greg and I have remarked even before you were on our radars that, we're both the first, and Greg, you'll correct me if I'm misspeaking, but I think we're both the first of our friend groups to have kids. So because the close friends I have who have children are back in Nebraska, and that's been going on for a while, right? I moved to the East Coast and life is a little different. And, there was a real sense of loneliness, especially with my core group of friends who I tour with in a band, that although they're very happy for me and they're so supportive, there's just that little piece, that disconnect, that support can't really be there in certain ways because of that lived experience. And enter Greg, who I'd worked with for years and in another job, and now he's back here. One of the first things that I benefited greatly from Greg was just this idea of like, oh man, last night was rough. And like Greg being able to say like, oh yeah, I've been there, and Greg, that has been your experience as well.
Yeah, we have very similar lived experience there because similarly also in a band, bandmates don't have children either. So there's, and as you said, supportive, but they're just missing that, like, the stuff that happens behind the scenes that, like, I can't really go to them to talk about because they can't relate to it. They'll listen, they're open to hearing it, but we kind of, I'm like searching for someone to be like, yo, you're in it with me, you get it, right? So like, Kai, you're one of like the very few people that I can go to about that sort of thing. And I think this is a perfect segue, Jason, for you, which is that like there's that need for like father connection, right? There's got to be like that community of just like fathers being able to speak to each other and just have that relation, right?
Absolutely. I'll just quick anecdote before we get to the community piece, and I think I know where you're going with that. But one of my dearest oldest friends, we've known each other since we were 12. I'm 51 now, and when my 17-year-old was born, coincidentally, he moved to the area. No kids at the time, wasn't married. And so like I had a newborn and he'd call in like a Wednesday at 10 and be like, hey, do you want to come meet me? We're going out. I'm like, oh, no, I don't want to do that. You can't even come over here because I'm going to bed. Like I'm done.
Right.
And he was great. I mean, he understood and whatever, but like you're saying, there's a certain limit, right? Like there's a certain
Hmm.
there's a lived experience. And so the idea of building community, it doesn't mean that every father is automatically going to be your deepest, truest friend, but having that level of safety and community to be able to share lived experience, to be able to come in from that sort of adventure of fatherhood and go, oh my God, you want to hear what happened today? My gosh,
Hmm.
right? Like, and what some of the work that I do at Journeyman, our sort of motto is, your journey is our journey, your work is our work. And that really speaks to this, someone will come in and let's say spend an entire hour sharing what's going on for them and then go, oh, I'm so sorry. I just took the whole hour. And, the response that I don't even have to say anymore, but from another man is saying, did you notice that everybody's head was bobbing the whole time? Did you notice that just by you sharing your story, we're all growing? And so
Hmm.
the idea of being able to do that in a place that feels okay is affirming of, you know, this is a fatherhood space and it's okay. And we can talk about like all of the ridiculous stuff that happens, share
Hmm.
some dad jokes and all of these things. But I think that is incredibly important, whether it's at work, whether it's outside of work or in your community or through a men's group.
Hmm. Yeah, and I guess maybe off the top of your head, is for leaders, is it about creating those spaces like at the workplace? Like Greg and I just came about it naturally because we've been friends for a while, but I mean, we rarely text outside of work because if I text Greg, it's maybe a video didn't upload or Wendy needs, you know what I mean? So I'm careful about that. But
Yeah.
for Greg, it came across naturally, but there's been such a level of empathy that we have for one another at this time in our lives that it's not that like you're excusing maybe something got in an hour later, but there's the benefit of the doubt is there, right? And I think that's
Mhm.
so important in the workplace of just trusting that the people are there to work and to enjoy themselves, but it does take that kind of, I don't know, like removing of this wall we put up when we come into work and we're not ourselves anymore. So I guess what's the leader's role in like helping create that environment?
there's a couple of different pieces, but the first thing that, when I've talked with leaders and really sort of challenged them is to name it explicitly, right? Like there's so much that in sort of men's work, men's health, fatherhood roles that doesn't get spoken. Or if it does, it gets explicitly shot down, right? Like, this is, because there's such a growth in the roles of men these days, which I think is absolutely important. There's also at the same time this, I've heard numerous times when I say I work with men, I've heard people say, well, we have to support more women. We have to support more X, more Y, more, they're every other group. And
Hmm.
the idea that that supporting one group doesn't minimize support for another group is really important to
Right.
understand. And fathers and fatherhood and men in general, we have, incredibly, the statistics are heartbreaking, the highest level of suicide, of drug abuse, of irritation, of jail, of,
Hmm.
all of these things. And so men are hurting and hurt men hurt others. So we're actually supporting all of
Hmm.
society by supporting men.
Sure.
Right. So to answer,
Yeah.
that's a little bit of a side note, but to answer your question directly, leaders have a responsibility to name it. And then
Yeah.
all the other things they can do come second. But if we don't name that these things exist,
Right.
then especially as leaders, people who we almost by definition have some power over in terms of their job, it's much more challenging for individuals to sort of speak out and say, hey, I need this, or I want this, or I hurt,
Yeah.
right? So if we
And I
name
think
it
another
and start to
thing,
build a community is important. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
I was going
Go
to
ahead,
say
Greg.
another thing that I kind of have seen firsthand is like leaders need to live it too, when applicable, right? But like,
Hmm.
um, but Kai and I see that firsthand from Wendy is finding time for family.
Yeah.
Um,
Big time.
right. So while Wendy is a mother and now a grandmother, she is
Nice.
living, integrating family into work, and I find that and using that when applicable in fatherhood as well.
Yeah,
That,
absolutely.
if
And,
I won't. Can
go
I
ahead.
just say
Yes.
one thing real quick? Because I don't want to take us too far astray, but that living it piece is so important because it also adds to the changing story of men's roles. Because by living it, I don't know if you meant this, but I hear it this way. By living it is a leader being vulnerable, a leader
Yeah.
sharing,
Oh yeah.
yeah, if they're a parent, my kid kept me up all night. I'm a little tired. Can someone step up and take over for me today? Or whatever it would be appropriate. But the idea that leadership, and especially leadership up till and including today, is based on a pretty male dominated, sort of patriarchal design. And if we choose to grow and be more connected and related, we can do leadership differently. So that's a whole other conversation. But just the
Yeah.
idea of living it is being vulnerable. That is strength.
Yeah.
That is a real level of connection and partnership that I believe leaders need to display more and more.
Absolutely. So well said, so beautifully said. And I think that is a bright future that I want to kind of work towards, right? And I guess maybe this is the segue, speaking of working towards or traditional masculinity. But, before we get to this exercise that you're going to lead Greg and us through, which we're so excited about, I really wanted you to kind of tell the listeners about the myth of the hero and the quiet journey of fatherhood that you is kind of sometimes is the backbone of kind of what you do. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. And I love the way you wrote the myth of the hero, because I feel like that's really important, because we have this hero worship in our culture. And, there's a lot of reasons where that came from and what that, does and the impact it has. But for in my research and the work that I do, there's a narrative, there's a story that has been named the hero's journey. A lot of people, listeners might know it, and if they don't, they still know, right? The narrative or the arc, the plot line of the hero's journey is something that is, it's Star Wars, it's every Pixar movie, it's Lord of the Rings,
Yep.
it's Harry Potter,
It's
right?
everything I
It's
love.
yeah, me too, and I love it. I wrote my dissertation on it. And the first 15 years of my career, I designed entire interventions and strategies and, worked with families. The questions that I asked individuals in therapy were based on the hero's journey. I love it.
Yeah, and I just want to pause just to give a little bit of context to the hero's journey.
Sure.
It's so intrinsic in storytelling. And it's something that is ingrained in, like you said, a lot of movies. So it's something that we're very familiar with. It tells a little bit about like the underdog, right? And it's about like these epic quests, right? That this underdog is partaking in. Just to give some of the listeners who are like, what are they talking about? To get a little bit of context as to that hero's journey, I think is important. So go on. Yeah.
Absolutely. No. And that's really important, because it is, even if we don't know the term, everyone recognizes it. In fact, as I was developing JourneyMen, I was doing workshops, I was seeing clients, I was doing some speaking, and I almost always start with the question, what's your favorite adventure story, real or fictional right now? And after asking thousands of people that, I always got some version of the hero's journey. Right? People would say Star Wars, or they would say that time I got lost on the mountain, or, one version or another, which in my younger days in my career, I would pat myself in the back and say, good, I'm right. This story is important. Let's use it. And that's where our culture has gone, right? It is used. I mean, again, I have worked with someone who writes for Pixar, and they have an outline of the hero's journey that they use to make every single film, right? And so it is ubiquitous. It is everywhere. And stories develop and support and guide our realities. And so if we think about a story that is so dominant, it actually pushes away potential for other stories. Right. And so, like I mentioned earlier about naming things and what leaders, responsibility is, because we don't even notice the roles of men. We have to name my favorite story is a dominant one that might be oppressive to other possibilities and potentialities. So let me think about that. And with that, JourneyMen was born, because the sort of insight and research came to for me is to a point where I really see now that the hero's journey being the backbone of our modern day myth is actually quite damaging to men and to boys, right? Because if we're not epic, if we're not legendary, what are we? And if we really look at these characters, yes, there's an underdog, but the underdog often is then elevated, right? And elevated to become a hero or a prince or a king who then gets to write history and tell everybody what's good and bad, right or wrong, evil and whatever. And what about all the peasants? What about all the people who stayed and didn't go on a grand adventure, right? They're heroes. They're the people who are keeping hearths burning, people who are wiping butts, doing dishes and chopping wood. There's a magic and adventure in their lives as well. And the hero's journey at its core speaks to some of that, but it's only half the story, right? It doesn't really support this level of understanding meaning making and values. And, this idea of, I often say the magic is in the muck. It's not just about getting to the top of the mountain. It's along the way. And that's where we find our treasures. And so for me, I started looking back and, you joke that those are the stories we all love, which is true. And then I looked back and I said, my favorite scenes in all the books and movies weren't, for me, it wasn't the swashbuckling, the dragon fighting, the sword play. It was the gathering. Even as a kid, I loved when the scene where in the Hobbit where they meet Strider at the tavern, or the cantina scene in Star Wars, or any number of things. Those were always my
They come
favorite.
in pints?
Exactly. Yes. And why do people go to these places? No, let's take alcohol out of the story. Why do we go? We go to see and be seen. We go to share stories. We go to develop new skills and relationships. We go to get, information from the shady guy in the corner. We go to get rested and nourished, all of these things. And so for me, I started developing sort of what I originally called Adventure's Other Half. It was the other half of the hero's journey story, and created an entire narrative and plot line and model that really helps men to support that element of their story writing. Right. And by doing that, if we think about all of the greatest heroes' journey of the adventures, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, only when the hero is getting stomped on do we then get maybe a 3-minute montage of their backstory of why they're doing it, what they care about, what's important, all of those things. And that 3 minutes is really important, but it's undeveloped. And if we think about outside of the movie, we think about culture, it's undeveloped there as well. We all want to be epic. We all want to, whatever. But what's the, chop wood, carry water moment? What's the why? What's the element of what I do is magical and adventurous, even when I'm cleaning the bathroom? And how can that be something that I can lean into? Because then when the opportunity arises to be epic, I'm ready. But I also don't need to.
And
I don't need to. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. And Kai, I bet this kind of resonates with you similarly in that Kai and I are both musicians. Kai and I in our 20s were really pounding the pavement being musicians, and things have changed for us, right? And I don't know, Kai, if you've had this, but I've kind of had this I've had to really reshift and reevaluate what being a musician looks like now that it's sharing the stage with fatherhood, pun intended there. Do you know what I mean? There's these two identities that they can't just be separate, right? So how to integrate them. And the musician part of me was definitely living the hero's journey when I was 22 and in a van, right? And I was slaying the dragons, was getting on stage and playing all the different venues, right? So now that I'm a father and I'm doing that less, right? That could be damaging to someone, right? Someone living this kind of epic life in early adulthood and going into fatherhood and having that kind of the rug pulled from their feet. So being able to find that time to still be a musician and still do those things, but integrating it into fatherhood and acknowledging that, I'm going to do this a little bit less. I'm going to, I'm not going to be traveling as much as I did. I don't know. Let me throw that over to you, Kai. Like, does that resonate? And does that resonate
Oh,
with maybe other listeners, right? Like in a different field,
yeah,
right?
absolutely. I think for me, it's just like retaining my sense of self, because I don't feel any different as a person. Like,
Right.
and that's so funny when I say that, because I think a lot of parents are like, yeah, like I still feel like that person I've always been. It's just like your priorities have shifted. And for me, it's just like, at the end of the day, there's only so many hours. Was I able to find that hour or two for some music for myself? Is I think where I kind of feel it. And, I think what's really interesting about this, the hero's journey is, or the myth thereof, is kind of like how you bring that back to is it part of the group work that you do? That's correct, Jason, in terms of, so it's like, it's unpacking those moments in the hero's journey where they were, instead of fighting, they were at the table having a pint and just talking about someone. So I guess through that work with the group mentality, what kind of things like kind of come to life through like kind of the group talks?
Well, I want to go back to something you said before, where you said, like, I don't feel any different as a person. It's just the priorities have shifted, right?
Yeah.
There's a real, I would say there's a real truth to that, as well as something that is a little bit heartbreaking for me. Because when we take on the identity of fatherhood, we are changed, and we are lacking in so many ways in our culture, different, whether we call them rituals or shifts or identity changes, rites of passage, these kinds of things. In so many ways, we're missing that in our culture. We have some token events for kids when they're turning into, teenagers. We have, sweet 16s or bar mitzvahs, or, but we don't have
where was
that
my party?
Exactly. And, we have we have baby showers maybe for moms,
Sure.
and there are things called blessing ways for moms. And it's this idea of, gathering into this new identity. Well, in other cultures, other times, men have had that, right? Like, it's a pretty massive developmental shift to go from boy who an adolescent to a young man who, I used to joke, I was a dude, then I was a boyfriend, then I was a husband, then I was a father, and my dude self sometimes wants to come out more. And the resolution of my dude self with my father self is sometimes a real struggle. It leads to me staying up too late sometimes. It leads to me not always making the best choices. And it takes away from some of the connections that are in the center of my values. And so reconciling those stories is so fascinating, so important. So again, going back to your question, in the group work we do, men are able to start reconciling that. They can be honest about it. They can, share, like, I went out with some buddies for the weekend and we went to a concert and we went camping, and, it was nice. It was nice to be away, but it was nice to come home. And how do I bring the sort of treasures or experiences or insights from maybe a weekend with the boys into my everyday life with my kids? I mean, that's a big change. That's a shift.
Yeah. No, it's resonating so hard. I think what I'm hearing is maybe I haven't accepted that I've changed, or maybe I haven't, you know what I mean? Like, the idea of my prioritizing shift is maybe more how I linearly think about things, but like, chemically, I'm sure there's something happening in my brain. I've literally changed. When I look at Miles sometimes, like, you just fill with joy. And when he hits you with a hitting hand, and you have to remind him that this is a gentle hand, I'm surged with a little bit of anger that I have to tamper down and have to practice patience, right? So I guess there is a lot of change happening, which, I don't know, maybe is this a good segue into maybe the activity you wanted to take us through?
That sounds perfect.
Thanks for listening to This Is Your Job Now, produced by me, Kai. If this episode made you think or made you feel, we hope it also made you realize you don't have to figure this out all alone. Leadership today is about presence, not perfection. To learn more, follow Wendy Wollner on LinkedIn, subscribe to Balancing Life's Issues on YouTube, or stream the podcast wherever you listen. Because if you're leading people, this is your job now. Anything else to add, Miles?
Yeah.